Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Andrew Macklin, Managing Editor of Renew Canada, and we are pleased to present our September edition of our InfraIntelligence Infrastructure Discussion Series, with today's event focused on putting a price on transportation, whether or not it is time to revisit pricing for transportation here in Canada. We're so glad you could join us this morning. We hope that you'll join us in our conversation today. Your chat box is to the right-hand side of the screen. Please introduce yourself. Let us know where you're coming from, what you're hoping to learn from today's presentation, as we've got a great lineup of speakers who will take part today. Before we get to our speakers, I just want to take a few minutes to familiarize everyone with the software itself. In case you have never been part of one of our crowdcast discussions in the past, just told you about the chat window. If you find the chat distracting during our conversation, there is an opportunity to minimize the conversation. If you go to the top right-hand corner of the chat box, you'll see a little drop-down arrow. That will allow you to minimize the chat. And if you want to rejoin the conversation or type something in the chat box, just type on the window in the bottom right-hand corner where you would post a comment, and that will bring the chat window back up on your screen. Also, I want to remind you that this is a fully interactive conversation this morning, and we hope you'll take part in a couple of different ways. First of all, if you have a question at any point that you want to ask any of our panelists, I encourage you to go to the Ask a Question tab on the bottom of your screen. That gives you an opportunity to ask any questions you might have of any of our panelists or myself. There's also an opportunity that when you see questions, if you think that is something that you would also like to have answered, you'll see that there's a little voting option on the left-hand side. If you click on that, that upvotes the question that has been asked, and it allows me, the moderator for today's conversation, to realize that, yes, it is something that is a priority for more than one person to be able to hear an answer from. You'll also see a polls tab along the bottom. We do have several polls that we would encourage you to participate in today. That information is used for some of our post-event deliverables, and we hope that you will take part in that, as you know, that's some pretty valuable data for us to have as we tell people about this conversation after today's event. We also want to take a moment to thank 407 ETR, who has come on as a supporter of today's event. Thank you very much to their generous support, and we look forward to having them involved in tolling conversations, past today, as they are very active in tolling here in Canada, having just finished the 407 extension. If you haven't had a chance to drive the new extension, it is a beautiful new highway. It's a slick piece of concrete, piece of asphalt. So you definitely want to take a few minutes the next time you're in Ontario and give that a ride, because it is one of the nicest driving services that we currently have in Ontario. So encourage you to take a trip on it. As well, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little tab that currently says Renew Canada. Throughout today's presentation, we'll be putting live links through that green tab, which will allow you to learn more about some of the work that some of our speakers are involved in, as well as learn more about the work being done by our sponsor, 407 ETR. So encourage you to click on that tab and learn more about the great work that some of the people are doing that are involved in today's discussion. But that's enough from me. You're all here to take part in the conversation, which we're looking forward to getting started. So let's introduce our three speakers who will be joining me on the panel today. First of all is Pat Jones. Pat Jones is the Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of the International Bridge, Tunnel, and Turnpike Association, based in Washington, D.C. Pat has held the position since January of 2002, and he is based in Alexandria, Virginia, and we're very excited to have Pat join us for today's conversation. Second of all, we have Martin Collier. Martin is the founder of Transport Futures, an operation that he has run since 2008. I'm sure a lot of you have been to Transport Futures events in the Greater Toronto area, but if you haven't, it is the #1 spot in Canada for real conversations about opportunities for mobility pricing here in Canada. Very open dialogue on where the opportunities really lie here in Canada. And lastly, I want to introduce Harry Kitchen. Harry is Professor Emeritus from Trent University. Harry, best known in this space recently for a report that he published with our friends from RCCAO back in November of 2019, which talked about whether or not it's time to revisit the topic of road pricing as we see a decline in municipal gas tax revenues. So we're excited to have Harry part of this conversation, as we know he has authored some great academic work on this topic in recent months. So thank you. I see Pat and I see Martin so far. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Really appreciate you being part of the conversation. And there's Harry. So the whole team is here. So let's get into our conversation, gentlemen. First of all, let's talk about the appetite for transportation. The three of you come from really different perspectives, I'm guessing, on this, because Pat, you've kind of got that international look at what this looks like as far as the appetite for tolling. Martin, you've had so many conversations with so many municipal leaders through your events on this, and Harry, I know through the research that you did as for your recent report, you've probably got a really great perspective on this. So Martin, why don't we start with you? From the information you have gathered from the municipal leaders that you have had as part of your events in the past, what is that current appetite for road pricing really feel like?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the panel, and it's great to be with Pat from the IBTTA, because his director of communications, Bill Kramer, was with us a few years ago, and Harry has been with us at least 4 times, and I think was the actual very first speaker at Transport Futures back in November 2008. So basically, first of all, my perspective has always been is how can we manage demand better on the existing infrastructure, the road infrastructure that we have. I think it's interesting that the title of this event is about transportation pricing, but we do have transportation pricing. We pay for airplanes, we pay for transit when we use it. I'm talking about user fees here. We pay for when we car share or use Uber, we pay for it. If we take a ferry, we actually pay for that. So roads is a different thing. I think besides healthcare, it's the only thing in Canada that we don't actually pay for when we actually use it. And that Transport Futures events, we've had lots of different folks from government, from academic circles, from NGOs, and from the general public. But actually, municipalities have tended to stay away. I think that's maybe because they see it more as a provincial issue. When it comes to road pricing on highways and bridges, I think they see it, you just mentioned the 407 East. I think that's obviously a provincial highway, which, interestingly enough, was opened up in 2016, right around the time City of Toronto was trying to get the DVP and the Gardner priced, but the province said no to Toronto. So I think municipalities are in a tough case. The Municipal Act Section 40 says they need the approval of the province to move ahead. So I think it's really a partnership with the province and maybe even the federal government now, given COVID times, where they have to actually work together to bring this in. But there are ways, I can go on for a long time, that we could do it without government. But right now, I think municipalities are in, like you said, are in a tough situation financially. And I don't think they'd be able to do it on by themselves anyways.
Right. Harry?
Well, I think Marty and I view this, I think, through the same lens. I don't disagree with anything he said. I think one of the reasons municipalities haven't participated in things in the past is essentially because they think, you know what, we can't do it anyway. The Municipal Act doesn't allow us to impose prices. The province has shown no appetite for allowing. I mean, I think one of the interesting things that came up just to show this was back when the Liberals were in power in the province, and Tory wanted to put a toll on the Don Valley Parkway, and then the Toronto Act had said yes, they could do that, they could price for roads, and immediately the provincial government said no, you can't do it, even after they essentially permitted it. So there is a reluctance of the province to give them the powers. I mean, is it a good thing? Of course it's a good thing. I mean, it's absolutely a good thing. I think as a person who's looked at municipal finance issues for years and years and almost eons now, if at all possible, my view is charge, because you get a more efficient allocation of services and resources if you can charge the users who use the service. And my sense is, why should you charge somebody else for a service that they may not directly use, and the person who directly uses isn't paying for it? Excuse me. So this is a service that we can certainly charge for. And indeed they should. I mean, the municipality should be permitted to charge for the use of roads. And now that we see gas tax revenues and going down, and probably going down in the future, a recent piece I did a few years, 2 or 3 years ago, took a look at the decline in the use of of gasoline in motor vehicles and the increase in electricity for vehicles, and the Energy Board of Canada put together a data set that goes out about 20 years from now and goes back. And if you trace that through, I mean, you see by about 2024 an increase, a significant decline in gas tax, in gas usage, and therefore gas tax revenues, and quite an increase in electric vehicles. And the only way to, of course, to do this is basically charge them for the use of the road and vehicle kilometer hours. There's a variety of congestion pricing and vehicle kilometer tolls and things of that nature. I'm not sure I'm the appropriate one to discuss which of those they should use. But my view, very simply, is it's a case where you can charge users, you charge users. There will be political blowback, but I think you can get over this. I shouldn't go on and on, but just one final comment. I did a report on financing roads and transportation in the Greater Toronto Area in 2007, and I got absolutely hammered for any notion that you should charge those people who use roads, charge them for using roads, talking about tolls. I was on a couple of phone-in radio shows, absolutely, one after another lined up criticizing. Editorials are written in local community newspapers attacking this notion. Why should we pay for roads? 2013, I co-authored another report on the same thing and updated it. And we took a look at the surveys. Now, these are not scientific surveys. People being asked, will you pay for the use of roads? But there were a number of them that were done. And it was interesting. There was an amazing change from 2007 to 2013 in the attitudes of people. A lot more people said, yes, you use the roads, you should pay for the roads. And so there was a change there. I also was back on some of these phone-in radio shows answering questions. I think it was a CBC phone-in from Toronto, and it was an hour program. I only had one critic in that hour. And I think 6 or 7 years before, I only had one supporter in the hour. So there was a change in attitudes. What's happened since then, I don't know, really, because I haven't looked at it. But there was a change of attitude. And if you take a look at the younger people, I think of my kids who are now in their 40s, early 50s, but you take a look at their attitude is we use it, we should pay for it. Guys like me try to fight it at times in my age cohort. So, I mean, I think it's changing, and at least I hope it's changing. Anyway, I've gone on too long. I shall drop it now.
Pat, your thoughts?
Yes. So my association, IBTTA, represents the owners and operators of toll facilities all over the world. In the United States, price managed lanes is quite popular south of the Canadian border. There are 54 price managed lane facilities operated by 27 different operators, over 800 centerline miles in 11 states. So clearly, the value of price managed lanes is evident to people in the United States. I would point out that in cities, regions, communities that are opposed to pricing for roads, you're already paying a price. You think about your large congested urban areas where you may get on your interstate highways or major arterials. You experience the equivalent of an electrical brownout for 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, because the road system simply can't handle the volume of the traffic. And what pricing does is it helps to even the flow, so that if you're stuck in traffic and paying the price of all of your delay, you can actually pay a real fee based on the congestion that's in the roadway and the number of vehicles, and enjoy benefit for that. And Harry mentioned surveys or studies, public opinion studies. There's a very well-known study that was put out by the U.S. Transportation Research Board of the National Academy of Sciences in 2008. It was a synthesis of public opinion studies, more than 100 studies that looked at people's attitudes toward paying higher gas taxes or tolling to support their road infrastructure. And the vast majority of those studies said that people prefer tolls to gas taxes or other taxes if they know that the money is going to be used to improve their roadway system. So I think there is an appetite, and the key to is education and helping people understand. We often see before a toll facility or a price managed lane facility opens, there tends to be more opposition. But after it opens and people experience the benefits, we see a lot more positive attitudes toward tolling or pricing.
Right. And that certainly is something that I want to touch base on, because, Marty, I can remember coming to one of your events a couple of years ago, and you had, I believe it was the mayor from Aurora, Colorado, that was speaking about some of the tolling successes. And, I had a great conversation with him, and public engagement is certainly something that comes up, and you're right, Pat. I mean, it's trying to figure out, how do you educate people and how do you get them to trust that those revenues are actually going to bettering the transportation system. And I'm just wondering, from the experience of the three of you, like I said, you're coming from different directions, which I think is great, because that's why I wanted the three of you here. I'm just wondering, what are some of those success stories we've heard as far as educating the public and campaigning to inform the public of what the benefits are of introducing tolling? I don't know who wants to jump in on that first, but whoever, by all means.
I could try that first. First of all, it's interesting you mentioned Steve Hogan, the mayor of Aurora, because unfortunately, and I was very sad to hear this, I found out a year after that he actually died, unfortunately, of cancer. So my condolences to his family and friends and everybody who elected him. He had been elected to office at state level, at municipal levels, and he was a real leader. I think that's what we actually need, is we need people to like him and others who've actually put their name out there and supported tolling, because I think if the leadership is there, all the technical, the economic, the investment, all those other things can be taken care of. We definitely have the technology to do amazing things right now. But yeah, I think that's maybe the key thing we have to be looking at, is that leadership. I'm sorry, I got sidetracked by your exact question there. I just started to think about Steve. Could you just repeat that one more time?
Yeah, it's just, what we've heard about community engagement that's been successful when it comes to road pricing or tolling.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the way Stockholm, when they brought in congestion charges back in the mid 2005, 2006, they actually showed people how it would work. They actually did a pilot project where for 6 months, they had everything priced, and people saw the congestion reduction benefits. The transit was actually sometimes arriving before, it stopped before the time it was supposed to arrive, and the bus driver would have to sit there and tell everybody saying, we're too early. And so nobody ever heard that before. And anyways, in the end, the support, after 6 months, they had a referendum and they brought it in, and now it's about 70 to 75% support. When they first brought in that pilot project, it was probably about 50-50, and it's 75. And now one of the parties, the Conservative Party that was against it in the beginning, is now big road prices and totally in support of it. So everybody realizes this is the way forward there. So I think that for me, that is the best way to show, especially in Canada, where we have 407 ETR and now the new 407 East. And I want to give a shout out to 407 ETR, who's been one of my sponsors from 2008, have been with me for 12 years. That they're actually examples of how things are done, but they do only represent, I think I worked out 0.003% of the entire Canadian road network is actually tolled. So we don't have many examples. So we need to do that more. An example, which I know Pat probably knows a lot more about than me, but we've had people from Oregon up to speak 3 times at Transport Futures about their road pricing pilot study, where everybody, no matter where they drive, no matter which road they're on, they actually are priced through GPS-based technology. And so that, and they could fluctuate. I don't think they're doing that yet, but they could actually make that price dynamic depending on what time of day people drive out. So the price would fluctuate. But that's another example where they've been piloting this study where people are driving wherever they drive, they have to pay, whether it's a dirt road or a highway or arterial road, they actually have to pay a fee for that instead of paying the gas tax. And so that's sort of a quid pro quo there for the people who are involved, but it is a volunteer based system right now, and they're hoping, I think, Pat, maybe 2024 was the last I heard, where they might try to move it right across the state.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this conversation as well, Andrew, about getting the public behind you and educating them. And I would use 3 terms or 4 terms about communication and community engagement. I'd say early, simple, transparent, and persistent. If you look at successful projects that have implemented pricing, the leader of those projects, the sponsors, have come into the community really early to not just tell people what's going to happen, but to listen to people's concerns, to really understand what are the concerns that people have. You have to speak in simple language. You can't use jargon. You have to speak in language that people understand. Repeat back to them the language that they are using to describe the challenges and the obstacles that they're facing with traffic congestion. You have to be transparent. You can't hide things. You can't sugarcoat things. You have to talk about what's going to happen positively, and if there's going to be delays because of construction, you have to be transparent about that. And then the last piece is you have to be persistent. You can't assume that going into a community and giving your spiel once is enough. You have to do it many, many, many times and continue that communication even well after the project is completed. And I think about an example here in the Washington, D.C. area where I live, where Transurban and its partners came in and helped to and rebuilt 14 miles of the Capitol Beltway to include 2 new price managed lanes in each direction. That was the mantra of that organization and its partners. Communicate early, simple, transparent, and be persistent.
Harry, anything you want to add to the conversation?
Well, no, I mean, I agree. Education is critical here, and leadership is certainly important. I was involved back in the late 1990s in a number of government restructuring studies, and these were mainly in counties. And, you know, when you go in and look at a place and you've got a very, very small township, and you're talking about merging it with a neighboring village, and everybody comes out to we could get more people into a hockey arena in the middle of August to fight this than I'd ever seen in my life in a hockey arena. They didn't even come that far in the winter when the ice was in. And the critical thing, the way in which you got it through is if you had effective leadership in those councils who saw the arguments and understood them and saw the benefits of it, they could lead. And we did some studies that were very effective, and it was all to do with leadership. There's no question that, Peggy. And some of the brightest municipal leaders I've ever seen in terms of what should be done are those that are not running again. They decided, well, I've given up now, but then all of a sudden they've seen the light and they start talking about a lot of really sensible things. I think the thing we have to do in terms of this at the municipal level, municipalities are up against the wall right now in the financial situation. COVID has cut back any municipality running a public transit system is losing a huge amount of money. The buses are still running. Either the ridership is free or if there are very few people on it. And this has caused some serious problems. Well, in Canada, municipalities have 2 options. The only thing they can use is a property tax or user fees from locally owned source revenues. They have miscellaneous license and dog tags and things like that, parking ticket revenue. But that's very small. So you've got 2 charges. And basically, if you're living in a municipality and your property tax is going up and you don't directly use the roads, and we all benefit from them because things we get come on roads, I know that. But in terms of the direct usage, you know, it's surely not a hard thing to say, how do you want to finance this, guys? Do you want to do it by property taxes on everybody, or will we charge those people who use the roads for the use of the roads? The only people who will resist that are those who use the roads a lot. And some of them don't even resist it anymore. They recognize it's a cost of doing business. It's a cost of whatever you want to do, and you incorporate it. You pay the price for doing the things you want to do. And I think sitting around a golf club and a lot of friends who bitch about property taxes and they're too high and what do I get? Well, when you start listening to the services they get from the property tax, they get a whole lot of services. And the problem is a lot of people see these services being free goods. They get in their car, they back out on the road in the morning, they drive down the road, they think, well, it's free. And as soon as the property tax is to pay for that, well, they get mad as hell. Well, you know, come on, who's paying for this? Do you want somebody who directly uses it to pay for it, or are you going to ask everybody to pay for it? And when you start doing that, they sit there and have another swig of beer and say, I never thought of that. And, you know, so there's a lot of educational stuff that goes on in this whole thing. And I think the notion that we already pay taxes through tire tax and other things, that all goes into general revenue. None of that has anything to do with directly financing roads. We don't know. That goes into provincial general. We don't know where that's spent. It may be spent on education or health. It's not necessarily in roads. And I think the comment was made before. I think Pat made it. The critical thing here is to be transparent, but you probably have to earmark these funds. A lot of people are opposed to earmarking, and there are some reasons why you can be opposed, but I'm actually a huge supporter of earmarking funds for directly spent on roads from revenues generated from it. So I think there's an education thing that goes, and the tire tax, the thing, the tire tax we pay for, you know, well, it's not based on road usage. I could have a second car, you know, I've snowbird, been out of the country for 5 months every winter. I got a second car sits here. I paid tire tax, but the car's never on the road. You know, the tire tax is not a tax that's going to generate usage or revenue based on usage. So you need something that's a lot more directly related to that. And the notion you put a tax on electricity, I'm not in favor of that. Put a tax on the people who use the roads, and if it's an electrical vehicle that use the roads, let them use the roads. Just to throw a tax on electricity is, you know, to me, just a crazy idea. Anyway.
Well, and you brought up a good point about the whole COVID situation, because you're right. I mean, municipalities are in really dire straits. You know, I mean, you know, imagine the situation they'd be in if the governments hadn't bailed them out here, provincially and federally. But you know, this is, you know, and this is the reason why, you know, I wanted to have this conversation with you guys right now, is because to me, sitting where I'm sitting, looking at the infrastructure landscape in Canada, I'm saying, well, isn't this the time for us to revisit the way municipalities bring in revenues to get the job done? And you're right. Yep. If people are going to use the roads, let that money pay for the roads.
Yep.
You know, I get some of the resistance. I mean, you know, Marty, you brought up City Toronto. I mean, how much did we hear from the suburbs, the mayor of the suburbs all around Toronto screaming bloody murder because of the fact that it was all of their folks who are coming into downtown Toronto to work that would be the ones being taxed. And to which Mayor Tory said, well, yeah, you're the ones using the roads, guys. Like, yeah. You need to pay for this, but I'm wondering if, you know, in this new COVID reality that we're in, where municipalities are suffering severely, is this the opportunity now to revisit this situation and say, no, you guys need to be able to bring in revenues this way in some sort of framework?
Sure. I would say, yeah, they should have the opportunity. I mean, I actually think, and I've written about this, that the large cities in Canada should have access to more than the property tax. They can have access to the income tax, provincial income tax. There are a variety of ways you can do it. I mean, the trick is here, the local councils are the ones who have to be, in my view, responsible for setting the tax rate. And you piggyback it onto the provincial or federal tax and the revenues you collect. I mean, the administrative part of it is really basically very simple and not expensive. And I think there's a strong argument for that, but that's probably getting us away from road. I don't think that you should be using income taxes to finance roads necessarily, particularly if you've got an option of putting a user fees on. But there has to be a tremendous switch in provincial attitudes towards this as well. A lot of the provinces are really unwilling to give cities much more flexibility in what they do. And this has been documented and discussed probably for 5-6 decades, at least in Canada, where every time, you know, these provincial politicians who want more power and they want more taxation opportunities and more power to make their own decisions, and they make very good arguments for it. But then they decide, you know what, I'm going to run for the provincial legislature in the next election. So they give up their mayor's position or their council position and they run for the provincial legislature. They get into the provincial level and they switch their arguments. All of a sudden, no, we're the big brothers, we have to look after them. And the notion that you should do this just suddenly goes out the window. And you've seen that for years. So, you know, until you can get the province to back off and say, we have to give cities more power to do things, it's going to be tough to bring this in. And sometimes, you know, it's unfortunate. I've argued for a long time in municipal, if you want to get change, you may have to have a catastrophe. Well, you know what? I think we have one. Yeah. And maybe this is the time to move. Was it Winston Churchill or a whole bunch of other people said, don't waste a disaster? You know, and maybe it's time to move. Maybe this is really the time to take it. But I don't see any intent to do that. I mean, I think that governments, in all fairness, provincial and federal governments, are totally preoccupied with the response to COVID and the health concerns and all the rest. So it's a tough time to be bringing all this stuff in, but it certainly is something that as we move out of the COVID era, that I think really does have to be addressed seriously in Canada.
Martin, Pat, anything you want to build on that?
I think one thing that's been interesting due to COVID on the transportation front, at least some municipalities right here in Guelph, Ontario, where I am, they've actually took the opportunity to do things that I've been calling for like 20 years, which was use existing road space and road lanes where on arterial roads to build more bike lanes and create a better buffer for pedestrians as well. And so in Guelph, it's very limited, but just on 2 bridges, they created pinch points where they put bollards into an existing lane, so people who are crossing that bridge by bike or on foot could actually cross and keep the 2-meter distance. And it's unbelievable. I bike up there almost every day, and it's unbelievable the difference that it's made to the safety just crossing one sort of 50-yard, not even 50-yard bridge. And they've done it in one other place too. In Montreal, they rolled out 327 kilometers of bike lanes on existing lanes, which I think previously they couldn't have done so fast. In Toronto, they just extended the Bloor bike lane out to Runnymede and out to, I think, Maine along Danforth, which cyclists have been calling for since at least 1992. And it happened all in the last basically 3 months. And so it's showed that they've been able to do that. Another thing that a lot of municipalities have done is actually taken parking spaces as well as even the right of way to build dining districts so that restaurants could spill out onto the street because they just couldn't get the same number of tables. They had to because of social distancing again. So it's amazing some of the things that they've been able to do. Now, I think road pricing is a longer term thing. I'm not sure how long COVID's going to go for. We've heard here in Guelph from our public health that it's going to keep going for 2 years, but I still don't know if that's enough time to put everything into place for road pricing, even if municipalities were able to band together and they worked in partnership with the provincial government. I think this should have been done, when I started this in 2008, that was the time. If we had this in place by even 2015 or something and things were starting to roll out, we would have been much more in a position to do it. But I think it would take much, much longer in Canada to actually put it on the ground. But you never know. We could do pilot projects. I think we could start with willing municipalities, hopefully a willing provincial government, and actually try to test out some of these GPS-based technologies because we don't have time to build gantries and all the systems that 407 ETR has. Maybe we can talk to 407 ETR, see how many they can build out quickly, but or what they've done in Stockholm using gantries as well. But I think the way to go is cell phone technology and work with people who want to try systems, get information they need, because it goes way beyond road pricing. We can apply it to parking. We can apply it to carbon pricing. There's a lot more we can do. But anyway, I'll let Pat weigh in here.
Well, related to this line of thinking, there's an interesting comment from Michael here. It says, at the municipal level, roads are on a spectrum of user pay between those that are funded 100% by user fees, garbage and water, and those that are entirely funded by taxation, police, fire. The trouble is, we don't really know how society's contribution for roads is used. And I think that comment points to a key challenge that we in the road infrastructure infrastructure space confront. And that is that there's a common misperception that, roads are free, like Harry was saying a little earlier, you get in your car, you back up on the driveway, the road is here, I'm going to use it. And yet nobody bats an eye at every month paying their electric bill or paying their water bill or paying, more than $100 a month, for this device and all that it entails. And yet somehow the roads, are free. They're just there. And so I don't know if this is a North American thing or an Anglo-Saxon thing, but somehow we've got to help people better understand that roads are not free, that they start to break down as soon as they're paved, and the space that you use on the road is worth a cost as well. And that's why pricing is such an important thing. So we have to get people's, to recognize that roads are as important as these devices, and you need to pay nearly as much for the roads as for that handy technology that we rely on every day.
It's interesting. I think one of the things that this isn't just an observation, but one of the things that COVID has done, I believe, at least in Canada, I think it's given us the whole notion that has been pushed in a lot of places is smaller government, smaller government. You know what, boys? That ain't going to happen. And I think a lot of the people are accepting that. Given the nature of the problem we face now with COVID and the importance of governments, we are now seeing that small government's not going to work. We're going to have larger governments, and we're going to have to pay for it. And I think we should accept that. And the question is, how do we pay for it? And I think one of the reasons for having road pricing is municipalities are going to have to raise taxes or raise their revenue sources somehow to do the things. So what do? You put a general tax on everybody, property tax, or do you actually put a charge on those people who use the service? And it seems to me this message has to get out, and it has to get out wide and clear. And as to the particular type you impose, type of use, some are better than others, and I'm not sure I can comment on these. And I know I can't comment on these in any kind of intelligent way, except to say that we need some form of user pricing policy here. And I think this has just got to be pushed. And I've done one or two of these kind of webinars, and I've been pushing this notion that since it started, that we have to face this. We're going to have to pay higher taxes in Canada. We're going to have to pay higher HST rates. We're going to bring back the 2 points that the previous Conservative federal government cut out of the HST, which was a terrible policy in my view. It should have been left there. If you're going to do anything, you cut the income tax, not the HST. I think that the national sales tax here we have is a good tax, a very good tax. And in some other countries, Pat, your country needs one too, if it's going to fight its deficit and debt problems. And I think there's a strong argument for just making this point and clearly making this point and repeating this point. And it doesn't need to come from old guys like me, but it's going to start and come from younger people too. And they're the ones that should hopefully be pushing this, because they're the ones going to be affected. I don't think it's going to affect me, but it'll certainly affect them.
Just one interesting thing I was going to just quickly jump in there, which I saw. I've only seen this once in Canada, and Pat, you can tell me if this has been done in the U.S. But when the province of Quebec was rebuilding its Mirabel Highway back at least 20 years ago, they actually put signs up saying how much it was costing. They right on the roadside, they had big signs saying how much this was costing to build. And I've always thought that would be a good way to start, whether even if somebody's out on the main street out here by my door, fixing a pothole right up to rebuilding a highway. We should tell people who are passing it by, the drivers who are benefiting, they're just sitting there pissed off that they're in a construction zone usually. That's right. And the traffic's backing up, but tell them what's happening, because I think the communications there isn't good, even online and in the newspapers. If they do put a cost of a new highway, it's always the very bottom line. It's not usually in the headline, at least if in municipal communications. The press obviously sometimes does things differently. It was interesting that just I guess a year or two ago, the Premier of British Columbia got elected partly because he said he was going to take tolls off the Port Mann and Golden Ears Bridge. And it's cost, in the 2 years after he did that, it actually cost taxpayers over $480 million. And it's going to be up to $1 billion lost. He just called an election 2 or 3 days ago. So it's not, but if he had stayed in for 4 years, it would have been up to almost $1 billion. And so those are the kinds of things we have to say to people. Do you want to pay, I'm glad to pay if I benefit, if I take the 407 ETR, even a 400 series highway, I'm glad to pay for it if I have a reliable trip and get to my destination on time. or do you want everybody to pay and sit in traffic? And Pat already talked about sort of the wear and tear, the loss of time, the fact we can't get to our kids' soccer game on time, we can't sleep in, all those things. We got to get those messages out. And one way, at least on the finances, is to add it to every single road sign and every website that has anything to do with construction, MTO, City of Toronto, City of Guelph, City of Peterborough.
Yeah,
Marty,
exactly.
I love your example of the road signs in Quebec that talk about this is what this section of road is going to cost. And that's all part of the communication program. You need to let people know what they're going to get in benefit for their taxes or their fees. And I noticed there was a question in here about equity and the effect of road pricing on low-income people. And whenever you hear politicians, public officials, opinion leaders talk about increasing taxes or increasing tolls or implementing pricing for road infrastructure, you always hear somebody say, well, what about the equity issues? What about low-income people? And we have to acknowledge that low-income people are disproportionately affected by every major cost in our society, by housing, by healthcare, by food, by transportation. We're not solve the problem of the effects on low-income people by just focusing on one sector of the economy, like transportation, and say, you can't increase the gas tax, so you can't increase tolls. We as a society can do other things to mollify the effect of higher tolls or gas taxes through a much more comprehensive system that focuses specifically on low-income people.
Could I just jump in here, Pat? That's absolutely bang on. When we looked at when we did the 2013 report on it in Toronto, one of the issues we addressed was equity. And my view is that road pricing is equitable and fair. The people who use the service pay for it. And we have in Canada a pretty good safety security network for low-income people. By comparison with a lot of countries, it's actually pretty good. And it probably will get better in the near future. But and so there are income redistribution programs, and you're right. I mean, it helps people in poor. They're poor regardless of how you pay for services. The other thing about it, there's a very strong argument to say that part of the revenue generated from road prices should go, in the current moment, could go to supporting a better public transit system. It's the second best argument that's often made in economics in this, and can do it. And one of the things we looked at, in fact, low-income people could be a lot better off if you put tolls on roads. You directly toll the users of the roads. You use some of that money to build a better public transit system, because the low-income individuals, by and large, in the big cities in Canada, use public transit. And you're just helping them out too. So I think this notion that's hurting the poor, I mean, it's one that I don't think people think through very carefully. And I think you can make a strong argument, charge those who use. You have income redistribution programs that help the poor. And furthermore, if you put some of this money into improving public transit, you're going to help them even more.
Well, we've just got a break in the action just really quickly. I just want to remind everybody to check out the poll questions that we have. Be sure to answer those when you have a moment as well. We touched on several of the questions. Marty, I'll get to your point, but then I want to go to one of the really interesting questions that is in our question bar that we haven't touched on yet. So Marty, go ahead with your follow-up to Harry.
Just following up on what Harry was saying about redistribution of the revenue to transit, I think at least 5 or 10% should be put aside for low-income drivers, because there are drivers out there who have no choice on transit to get to work, and they may have 3 different jobs that they have to drive to a day. And so I think that's another case. And I think in LA, they do have a special, I think they're expanding this program, but they did have rebates on tolls, at least on the cost of transponders to begin with, on the LA area highways. So that idea, I think we have to keep in mind as far as earmarking at least some of the money for low income drivers, to give them rebates. And I've thought anybody who's working, a working poor person and has to drive, that money should be set aside and they get rebates. I'm not sure exactly how you'd set up that system, whether it be in real time monthly or through income tax, something like that. But those things can definitely be worked out.
All right, there's a question in there that one of our attendees has asked that I really think is worth a further discussion. We've answered a few of the questions already, but this one I find is really interesting. If comprehensive road tolling was in place, then road networks would be in the same jam as transit is right now due to COVID. This suggests that some sort of fixed plus variable pricing is needed, not just per kilometer or flat fee that are the options in the poll. So, but that brings up a really interesting point, because if you see the massive amounts of road construction work that's being done by municipalities as they're taking advantage of less cars on the road to get a lot of this construction work done. But if their revenues were coming from road tolls, road pricing, then in the pandemic situation that we're in right now, those revenues would be way down and you wouldn't be seeing the kind of work. So like there is a real balance that has to be found here. I know it's a fine line, a delicate balance, and perhaps we can't figure out how government should fix road pricing in Canada in a 1 hour discussion. But does anyone want to take a swipe at this and perhaps what the delicate balance can become?
Not even in a 12-year discussion.
I'll take a swipe at it. Yeah, I mean,
Go, Harry.
That's an important issue. However, that's a one-off situation. What is it, a year or 2 year problem? You can't design a system so that it's set up so that it handles the once in a century problem. You set up a system that says this is how we're going to charge for municipal services. Road pricing's in. The year that it's a bad year, that's a problem. But you recover that in future years. Like in Canada, municipalities are not in danger of going broke, because essentially there are a lot of constraints on them. They have to budget for a balanced budget each year on the operating side. If they run a deficit, because there's an unexpected calamity, which now there is on public transit, that will generate an actual deficit. But that deficit under the legislation has to be recovered in the next year's budget. So you see, you don't get municipalities in trouble because of large unfunded liabilities in a sense, or problems of running into debt for operating purposes. The only debt they have is essentially for long-term debt, is essentially for capital assets, which is not a bad way to invest at all in these. So I think we're going to have the odd year or 2 years where you're going to have this problem. And that's a one-off which we can accommodate. And we can accommodate it by sending it forward. I don't think you change your pricing structure, or you set up a pricing structure or a taxation system simply to accommodate these unexpected disasters in once in a while. You set it up on what makes good sound principle, and then you deal ex post with these problems. And I think that's the way I would respond to this.
Okay. Pat, Martin?
Yeah, I think what Harry says makes a lot of sense. And I'm, looking at the comments, and Moreau has a comment about how, British Columbia, made tolling issue number one and put the province back 15 years by, rolling back tolling. And Bern Grush has a great comment about distinguishing between not paying enough versus paying the wrong way. And I think we have to have a long-term strategic mentality about this. It's very difficult to take the issues of tolling and road pricing and funding for infrastructure out of the emotional. But we have to think about what kind of a society do we want to have 10, 20, 30 years down the road, and begin to plan for that type of society and implement pricing strategies that make sense and that are adequate to the task of, outfitting our society in the future. I mean, we've known for decades that the gas tax is not going to be sustainable as a source of transportation funding. Yet we've done very little to move off the gas tax and move toward things like tolling and distance-based user charges. We really have to think much more strategically about how we fund and finance infrastructure, and not be swayed by the one-off causes and the emotion that can get wrapped around infrastructure investment.
Good point.
I think that if comprehensive road pricing had been in place and we had multimodal infrastructure where people had choices on getting around, whether it's by car, by transit, by bike, by walking, we'd actually maybe not have had to have these sort of reactions with try to create more space with bollards and things like that, because the infrastructure would have already been in place to social distance, basically. So I think, we are in a pickle right now on what exactly to do. And I mentioned earlier that it might not be the best time, and we can't implement a whole road pricing system overnight, that's for sure. But I think we would be in a much better place, and I totally agree with the other panelists, thinking long-term and strategically and using existing infrastructure more efficiently. And, I'm a big person to say maybe, there are bottlenecks in the road system that maybe we have to expand the system, but we have plenty of highways to get around if we use them better. It's just about redesigning streets into complete streets, multimodal streets, where people, whether they're 8 years old or 80 years old, can get to where they want to go safely.
Gentlemen, we've got about 10 minutes left in this conversation, so I want to do some forward thinking here. We talked a lot, and I love this idea of moving away from gas tax and moving towards road pricing. And it was mentioned earlier, we need champions to be able to do this. And I'm just wondering, how do we get this message out, and who do we look to? Because, someone had mentioned, how do we get this on the page? How do we get this on the BC election agenda? Well, it might be a little too late for that one, because unfortunately they've really made up their minds, and they don't seem to be swayed very quickly, even though, as you said, Marty, the numbers are staggering as far as what they've lost based on, people physically using those assets. They could be, rebuilt in 5 or 6 years had they kept those fees in place. But I'm just wondering, how do we start to change this attitude? Who do we need to engage? What kind of education do we need to be able to start putting out there? Pat, I want to start with you on this, because, you've got that international perspective that, perhaps you've got some of that you can lean on to help us here in Canada to figure out, how do we change this narrative?
Andrew, thanks for the question. We had a keynote speaker recently at IBTTA's virtual annual meeting last week. And one of the points he talked about is that there are examples of great leadership and great education in our societies. And he talked about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and how he, was smart and calm and had a great education and was able to rely on those resources to help him be a great partner and negotiator with Churchill and Stalin. And I think there are still those kinds of people, in our society today. I think we've got to emphasize education at every level to help people not be, parochial about these kinds of issues. And I noticed the chat says, say something nice. So I'm going to make a shameless promotion for my association, IBTTA. We put on virtual meetings like this all the time, focused primarily on tolling. I know that you're not focused always on tolling, but if you're interested in that kind of programming on technology or finance, engineering, maintenance, go to ibtta.org and you can access that kind of programming. And thanks for the opportunity to be part of this program, Andrew.
Yeah. Martin?
Yeah, I think same thing at Transport Futures. We've been having the discussion for 12 years. We've had 26 conferences, 200 speakers from all over the world coming to talk about how you gain public acceptance. I think that's what we've really learned is how do you gain public acceptance. But I think what we have to focus on right now are the leaders. We need the Ken Livingstones. We need the Stockholms. We need the folks who in Oregon created that task force back in 2001 to start looking at road pricing that came all through government. So we've been wanting to actually ever since Bill Kramer is here, actually create a leadership education program, sort of a campaign where we could focus. There are some politicians who are willing to look at this. There are definitely some, maybe 50% who won't even talk to you. But of the other 50%, there's some who say, yes, we should roll on this. Others who want more information. So that's the one thing Transport Futures wants to do, is to have a focused campaign talking to the leaders themselves, talking them benefit, helping them to communicate the benefits and the costs of moving towards this new system we've been talking about. And then on the other side is definitely, and we learned this from Oregon as well, and I think Washington and Utah and California have all been doing these area-wide road pricing pilot projects. We can do that, and I'm looking for partners right now who are willing to come in and people to support financially and in kind so we can move forward on that. And we don't necessarily need, it would be great to have a willing municipality or maybe even a region like Mississauga, Waterloo, Guelph working together, and Halton working together as a region on that, but we could do it without the government and without the province. But if they wanted to come in, we could move much, much quicker. And so I'll put that out there, and my email is mcollier@transportfutures.ca or info@transportfutures.ca, and please get in touch.
Thanks. Harry?
Well, I don't have any organizational view on this at all. It's just my own view of having written on this for years. I think it's a really tough thing to do. I mean, I go back to the Toronto situation a few years ago when Tory suggested they put a toll on Don Valley Parkway. You know, it was $1 or $2 a trip or something, and it was unbelievable the amount of criticism that came from the surrounding areas about the notion of tolling, from the political leaders in the surrounding area about the notion of tolling, which was all idiocy in my view. I mean, the fact of the matter was the Don Valley Parkway was being maintained from the property tax paid by the people in the city of Toronto. Most of its usage was coming from people driving in. Well, why should the mayors or the people in the surrounding areas who are opposed to this be concerned about this? They're not paying for the Don Valley Parkway. I mean, unless you get political leadership that is willing to take a different view than just making silly statements like, why should my neighbors charge my people to use their roads when it's that municipality funding the road? Unless you get political leaders to stop making those kind of silly arguments and getting people all fired up, it's going to be a real problem. And I think I don't know how you do it. The attitude towards paying for services at the municipal level, maybe at any level, has to change. If we want good services, we have to pay for them. The question is, what is the best way to do it? And the best way to do it is to charge those people who are direct users of a service. And that's for garbage, it's for roads. And it's every solid argument will say they should pay for it. How do we get that through? I don't know. The political leaders know in their minds that argument makes sense, but then they stand up in front of the people that are going to vote them in or hopefully vote them in, and they may argue the opposite. Oh, we got to hold your taxes down. We don't want to charge you for anything you use. You got to stop that. You got to start preaching the benefit of good services and how we need good services. And I think this COVID that we're going through in the COVID time now shows that we do need good government services. And I think a lot of people are going to start to say, yes, we do. And therefore, we're going to have to pay for them. What is the best way to pay for them? Best way is to pay for those services have what we call private good characteristics, where you can identify the users. They are the ones who benefit. Charge them for it. The other services, which you can't, like fire and police and that, which you can't charge direct users, or you tend not to because you don't want to, or for whatever reason. I suppose you could. It'd be a bit callous maybe in a lot of ways. Anyway, you would simply say, they have to be funded from the local tax base. And of course, the local tax base at the municipal level in the big cities in Canada is not broad enough right now. It's restricted only to the property tax. Anyway, that's another argument for another day. Will we get away with that? I don't know.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. That's all the time we have. So to Pat, Harry, Martin, thank you so very much for joining us this morning for today's conversation. Don't forget, everyone, if there's parts of the conversation you missed, the replay will be available right here, probably within about an hour or two, and can be accessed at any time. A couple parting thoughts before you go. First of all, you'll see lots of links and email address for me if you wish to get in touch with one of the speakers. Encourage you to do so. If you haven't answered the poll questions, please do. Those are important data points for us to be able to use. Speaking of those post-event deliverables, we will be publishing an article on this discussion that will appear in the January-February edition of Renew Canada. So we encourage you to watch for that. We want to thank 407 ETR, our sponsor for today's event. We appreciate their gracious support. And like I said, if you're in Ontario, check out the new stretch of 407 heading towards 35-115. It's a slick piece of road to drive. It's definitely worth the trip. Be sure to also follow Actual Media on Crowdcast to learn about all of our upcoming events. We do have a monthly event as part of our Renew Canada InfraIntelligence discussion series. By the way, the next of which is Thursday, October 22nd, which focuses on electrifying the economy. And we thank Valor Construction for the generous support of that event. And also want to let you know a special edition presentation that we'll be doing November 10th, 1 week after the US election, looking at what the Canadian infrastructure impacts of the US election will be. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you being part of today's conversation, and we look forward to having you at a future InfraIntelligence discussion. Thanks so much. Have a great day.